All right, let's play us some good niche, bad niche. At the end of the day, I'm probably a little bit too excited about this lesson, but it's something I've never seen anyone teach and or never seen anyone go through. And at the end of the day, when we're talking about really complex concepts that are very difficult to discuss and teach in the abstract, the best way to do it is to give some concrete examples and walk through them together. So if you feel like you've got niche selection down really well so far, you know what? Just go ahead and skip this video. If everything has made sense to you, you can go straight into video 3.7. But I think the vast majority of people that are going through this training, I think it's more normal and more expected for you to kind of be lost and swimming in a lot of confusion and being a little bit overwhelmed. I would expect that at this point. Frankly, remember, it's perfectly natural. It's a normal reaction to learning a whole bunch of new stuff. Yeah, I think this is going to be very helpful if you find yourself in that situation. I think that is a very normal situation to find yourself in, given everything we've been learning and discussing. So if you feel like you've got niche selection down, go ahead and wrap up, watch video 3.7 and move into section 4. But if you feel like it would be helpful to walk through some examples step by step, that's what we're doing here. So, and I just named it good niche, bad niche because it was fun. In this particular video, if you find me casting my eyes off camera to the right, it's because I've got an extra monitor over here. Before starting the lesson, I typed up a lot of notes for each one of these niches, so forgive me if I'm not making as much eye contact as I usually do. This is the first lesson where I really wanted to make sure that I didn't miss certain things as we discuss these niches. So the first niche is women's clothing. Is that a good niche or is that a bad niche based on everything we've learned so far? Give you a second. All right, you've had long enough. That unfortunately is a bad niche, and there are several reasons why. But the main thing it ties back to is, I think in section 3.2, lesson 3.2, we talked about what's too broad, what's too narrow, and this is absolutely too broad of a niche. Even something more along the lines of women's dresses, which is another step down, makes it a little bit more narrow. Even that wouldn't be a very good niche. And the reason that both of these would be kind of invalid niche ideas, besides being a little bit too broad for women's clothing, is because the vast majority of products you could sell under each one of those kind of umbrellas would be less than $50 and a low percentage commission, right? You're not going to find a whole bunch of high percentage commission digital products in the women's clothing and women's dresses niches, right? So at the end of the day, the way you could kind of craft this into a more workable idea, better examples of good niches potentially in this industry, it would be, let's see, women's clothing about exercise, or women's clothing, let me take a step back, jumped in and said something that didn't make any sense. Women's clothing for exercise, or a blog about affordable fashion tips, something that talked about affordable fashion, talked about how to shop at thrift stores, how to shop online to find really good clothing and really good deals, basically how to be a deal hunter for clothing in women's niche. And you may say, well, Ian, that's going to be even less than $50 per commission, or less than $50 per product. But at the end of the day, if you create a bunch of content about how to shop affordably, how to find the best deals, how to piece together really kind of nice outfits for as cheaply as possible, you could have a section on your website that's women's outfits that are less than $100 or less than $150 or less than $200, that are total outfits, that they bought the hat, they bought the shirt, they bought the pants, they bought the shoes, and you get commission on each one of those. And then your total commission per outfit may be something like $10 or $15. So still kind of on the low end, but definitely workable. And the same thing for women's exercise, or excuse me, clothing for exercise. Like, for example, my wife just recently had to figure out like how to evaluate running shoes. She's been running a lot. She wants to make sure to protect her joints and make sure she's not going to be, you know, aching when she's older because she didn't buy good running shoes. So she was doing a lot of research on that, and there's so much information that you can cover and write about. And so, I mean, you could have an entire section on a website for women's exercise clothing and accessories that's just all about running shoes and what makes a good running shoe, you know, why a good running shoe is so important. And you could just kind of carve yourself out as an authority when it comes to running shoes and shoes for training, and then that's before you get into all different kinds of apparel in the women's exercise niche, and that could be, a lot of those are very expensive products, and they could again very easily exceed the $50 threshold I mentioned. And again, you know, it's going to be on the lower end of the commissions, but it's workable. It's totally workable. So these niches are much easier to carve your spot out due to having, you know, kind of a more targeted, smaller audience. And they're going to be, their behavior once they get to your site is going to be more straightforward and predictable. And at the end of the day, the more your audience as a whole has predictable tendencies, the easier it is to monetize, okay? If you're pulling from all these different things and all these different, you know, even though they're technically all in the same niche, if you're pulling different, you know, a bunch of different audiences and trying to funnel them through the same funnel, but they all have very different behaviors that aren't easy to predict, it can make it very difficult to monetize something as well as possible. So we'll talk about that when we get into conversion optimization and we get into keyword selection extensively. But for now, just know basically that end of the day, women's clothing is not a good niche, and those are the reasons why. It's too broad, the commissions wouldn't be high enough, and it's just going to be something that's really, really hard to specialize in and carve yourself out as a credible authority within that niche. All right? We talked about this one heads on, so you should know the example to men's fitness, or you should know the answer to the men's fitness example, right? Good niche or bad niche? That's a bad niche. That's another bad niche. Again, just like women's clothing, it's too broad. This is an entire industry. It's not a niche. Better ideas than men's fitness are running a website about how to build muscle or how to gain weight. There are a lot of guys, I found myself in that category for a long time. As I got older, my metabolism slowed down, and it is much easier for me to gain weight, unfortunately, now. But at the same time, fortunately, because, you know, it makes it easier to build muscle. So that could be a much better niche than men's fitness as a whole. Workout supplements for men, we talked about that pretty extensively throughout this section. Best home workouts for men. Home fitness equipment would be another one. Home gym equipment would be another much better niche than men's fitness as a whole. Remember, that's an industry. It's not a niche. All right. So hopefully that clarifies that and kind of shows you, hey, how do I go from something that is way too broad and turn it into something that's workable while also not, you know, boxing yourself into something that's too narrow. All right, this one's very specific, which is probably a sign of which way it swings. Dachshund, which if you're not familiar with dachshunds, that's a wiener dog, also known as a sausage dog, you know, the kind of long, I find very cute dogs. I say that because we own 3 of them, because I just wanted to demonstrate to the world what a man I was. So dachshund discectomies. A discectomy is where they remove a disc from in the spine. It's a surgical procedure. Again, this is specific enough that you should probably have a pretty good idea. Good niche, bad niche. So this, I would say, is a very good niche. And I know about this one personally. One of our dachshunds she blew a disc in her back. And over the course of several days, it was actually very, very sad. This was about 1.5 years ago. It was very, very sad. She slowly fortunately, we had her under vet attention by this point, and like, it could call the vet and say, when do we take her in for surgery? When do we take her in for surgery? But she slowly lost function in her back legs. Her back legs slowly, over the course of about 3 days, started to go paralyzed because the fluid from her disc was putting so much pressure on her spinal cord that she was becoming unable to use her legs. And if that had stayed that way for a long period of time, they needed to get in and relieve that pressure surgically, because otherwise she could have become permanently paralyzed, and even worse, something called spinal death can take place, where that portion of the spinal cord dies and essentially the dog just needs put down. So for the dog lovers out there, I'm sure you are feeling this one. So we did too. We felt it in a lot of ways. It was very, very difficult emotionally, because personally our dogs are members of our family. But it was also difficult financially because it cost about $5,500 once it was all said and done, maybe even closer to $6,000 to have that whole procedure done. And it was a nightmare. And the recovery was so difficult. So again, this one hits close to home. This is a perfect example of something that you encounter in life and you're like, man, that would be a really good niche. And there are a lot of reasons that this is a really good niche. You're dealing with a very passionate audience that's facing a very difficult problem. Remember, in one of the lessons we talked about those being kind of factors for a really good niche potentially. There is so much to write about in this industry. If you hadn't experienced it firsthand, you may not think so. You may think, oh, I can write like 3 articles about dachshund discectomies, but that's not true at all. You could write about intervertebral disc disease, which is a disease that all dachshunds have, and I don't think most dachshund owners know about until they kind of stare this face to face and encounter it. I know that the audience is fairly large because the one vet clinic that we went to in the suburb of Austin that we live in, they said they see typically at least one of these a day. So if you think about that times every vet hospital across the United States alone, let alone the world, you get some pretty high numbers, right? That has to be a pretty sizable audience. So writing articles about intervertebral disc disease, what it is, details of the operation and the costs of the operation, how to finance the operation, to make it affordable, the recovery aspects. There's so much that goes into it. We have to, for the rest of this dog's name is Marcy, and she's my daddy's girl. She's the one that follows me around everywhere. We have 3, like I said. She is, the one that follows me around everywhere. She's in the room with me right now, and she is most of the time I'm recording, and none of the other ones are. I'm gushing now, but Marcy for the rest of her life cannot jump. We have to limit how much she jumps because there's a high risk for that. She has to have, which means we have to have stairs all over the house. We have stairs that lead up to our couch. We have stairs that lead up to the recliners in my office. We have stairs that lead up, a ramp that leads up to the bed. So there are all different kinds of things to write about, right? So just to give an example, there's all kinds of content. You could write about so many different subtopics within the topics I've mentioned. And ultimately, this could be somewhat of a challenge to monetize. But at the end of the day, there would be several options if you got enough traction and started getting the traffic. You could write about pet insurance, right? Like I would be a prime candidate for, it may be too late for Marcy, it may be really difficult to get pet insurance for her, but for her 2 sisters that are also dachshunds, because a lot of households that own one dachshund own another or another 2, which is ridiculous. I know, whatever, it's a madhouse. But it wouldn't be a hard sell to say, hey, you should really consider pet insurance for your other dachshunds so you never go through this again. And you could get commissioned on that pet insurance. One of the problems we encountered was my wife crafted this, we had to have a sling for a while because after the surgery, her back legs gained function over time. So we had to do physical therapy, and we had to carry her back legs around in this little sling that had these handles. It was almost like a plastic grocery bag, and we had to support her back legs while she used her front paws. And it was just so ridiculous looking. But my wife she wanted one that was more comfortable and one that didn't look as sterile as, you know, the one that the vet clinic gave us, and she couldn't find anything online. So she ended up sewing our dog a custom sling that was more comfortable and was cuter because it was from a fabric that my wife chose. And again, when you're dealing with a very passionate audience that's emotionally distraught, that is a prime purchase opportunity. So you could ultimately either start off sewing those yourself, or just, if you got enough traffic and you saw the potential there, you got a large enough audience, you could launch a Kickstarter, you know, to manufacture these designer comfortable slings for people who had dogs that needed the sling when they got home from the operation. And then, you know, you could also, there's always the opportunity for like an ebook, like, you know, a $7 or $9 or, you know, $15 ebook that just walks people through the path to recovery, what to expect, and just kind of holds their hand through all of that, all of the difficult things on that journey. So I talked enough about dachshund discectomies, but of course I wanted to kind of walk you through the anatomy of why this is a good niche. Okay, moving on. Oh, and by the way, if you're like, how do I do physical products? That's something I'm going to teach down the road. I fully intend to teach down the road. It's one of the frequently overlooked monetization opportunities, because it can be really difficult and intimidating. But at the end of the day, if you're getting a bunch of traffic and that's your only way to monetize it really well, are you going to figure it out? Yeah, you probably are, because it could make your site, you know, take your site from being worth $1,000 a month to being worth $10,000 or $15,000 a month if you did it correctly. So again, you know, is it difficult to crack? Yes. Is it a lot to learn? Yes. Is it worth an extra $9,000 to $14,000 a month? Hell yes. So we'll talk about that much later in the training, because we're getting pretty advanced at that point. There's a lot we need to cover between now and then, but just know it's doable and it's an option. All right. Next niche, drone reviews. Is this a good niche, or is this a bad niche? For those of you that don't know, drones are those kind of helicopters, those miniature helicopters that carry cameras, and you can use them to survey, you can use them to shoot real estate footage, and a lot of people just use them for hobbies and use them for fun, okay? So drone reviews, is that a good niche or is that a bad niche? What? I wish I'd doom, 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 doom. I'd play the Jeopardy music. So that is a good niche with some challenges. This bumps up against those challenges that we talked about when we talked about technology. Can you afford to buy all of the different drones that you're going to be talking about? Probably not. But at the end of the day, this is a great niche with high cost purchases. It's just going to be somewhat challenging to add value. So if you can't afford to buy all of the drones for review, you need to come up with a unique angle to break into this saturated niche, where you wouldn't need firsthand experience or video footage to provide that value to your audience, right? So we talked about this earlier, you know, kind of talking a person like a buying guide for drones that could be broken up into multiple sections, what you're looking for, you know, what you need to look out for, what components are best, what the different metrics and specs mean when you're comparing drones side by side. If you're buying drones as a gift, you could create a drone gift guide to guide people to the absolute best drones based on whoever, you know, they were buying for, whether it be a friend or a spouse or a child. You know, these are the best options. So there are definitely opportunities that don't require you to buy all of the drones that you would be studying and looking at. There are definitely opportunities to add value there. You just have to, you know, research the industry, research the competition, look at what everyone's doing, and find your in, okay? So that is a good niche with some challenges. At the end of the day, a lot of those are going to be high dollar purchases, sometimes ranging up into several $100s each, and your commission on those, even if your commission percentage were only 3% or 5%, could still be $20, $30, $40, $50 for each one that you sell, okay? So good niche with some challenges. All right, here's an interesting one because it's tricky. It's tricky. So best phone cases. What do you think? Think that's a good niche or a bad niche? That is a bad niche, unfortunately. And that one's a little bit tricky, right? Because in one of the videos I said the best pretty much anything is going to be good to write about. This is an exception because of a more important rule, which is a couple of more important rules. One is it's a low dollar product that has a low percentage commission. Typically speaking, I know there are high dollar phone cases that sometimes range up to $100, but they're few and far between. So that's one reason it's not the best niche to enter, and it's a bad niche. But another reason is that it's too narrow. There's not a whole lot of content you can create for phone cases. You know, there aren't a whole lot of technical specs that need broken down in articles. And on top of that, you know, you're going to find yourself wanting to gouge your eyes out if you have to write article after article after article about, you know, these individual phone cases on all their different features and find a unique way to talk about this one and then find a unique way to talk about this one. It's not going to be worth it in the long run. So even if you could find enough to write about, the commissions just aren't going to be there. So how could you improve this? How could you turn this into a more workable niche? Well, obviously we need to broaden out some, right? We need to take it from something too narrow and kind of broaden out. So you could create a more holistic website on phone protection and phone replacement and phone repairs. Those could be individual niche sites, or those could really be all one niche site. And you kind of tackle each one by one. Remember, divide and conquer. So you could write about the most protective phone cases for impact, the most protective phone cases for water, and then you're cutting out a lot of those phone cases that cost like $10 and $20 and have, you know, way too low a commissions. And now you're carving out a niche where most phone cases are going to be $30, $50, up to $100 plus, because you're looking at very specific pains and very, very difficult to solve pains. And again, people, if they're looking for the most waterproof case, if they're looking for the phone case that is most resistant to impact, they're probably looking to make a purchase very soon. So if you're the person that gives them the information and links them to the best purchase, they're probably going to use your link and you're going to get commissioned on it. So another thing you could do on, you know, a more holistic site, you could talk about different phone insurance options, you know, whether you buy from your carrier or you buy from a third party. And if you refer them to a third party, there's probably a pretty handsome commission involved there. You could talk about the best options for screen repair. You could talk about all different kinds of options there. That could be several articles. You could talk about what to do if you drop your phone in water, how to be prepared just in case you ever drop your phone in water, and on top of all kinds of other benefits. Though that is the type of content that could go viral. People might share it if you do a really good job with it. How to be prepared, you know, how to be prepared for the day you drop your phone in water, because it's going to happen to most of us at some point. So that's the kind of thing that a lot of people could share, a lot of people could really engage in. And at the end of the day, this particular niche, if you broaden it out to something more holistic, like I mentioned, what did I say? Phone protection and replacement options. If you broaden it out to something along those lines, you're going to have a lot of different options for monetization. And another way to monetize, as I mentioned in one of the last examples, you could ultimately use this as a pushing off point, as a foundation for launching your own phone lines, or excuse me, that's confusing, your own line of phone cases. So you could do that through Kickstarter, or you could just manufacture based on what you see, the gaps you see, and you know, like, there's a lot of opportunity here. So you could launch your own crowdfunding campaign. That's something else I want to cover with this training. but again, that's much more advanced and down the road. We've got a lot to cover between now and then. You just should know that it's an option that most people traditionally don't talk about when they talk about how to monetize in this industry. Okay. Next niche, good niche, bad niche. And I think we only have a couple more. I think this is the last one or second to last one. So tattoo removal, right? Another fairly specific niche. Do you think that is a good niche or a bad niche? That is a good niche, in my opinion. So there is a lot of content to write about. You probably wouldn't know it if you hadn't gone through tattoo removal yourself. Believe it or not, I know a lot of people find it very hard to believe, but I have a tattoo. I have a very large tattoo, and I am, what is it? I'm like 11 treatments in, 12 treatments in. It's a very painful process, but I have found as I've gone through it myself that there is a lot to write about, especially for a really large tattoo. So there's so much to write about different lasers, how to, different aspects of recovery, everything from pain management down to, which creams you should use, because essentially what's happening when you're getting a tattoo removed is you're experiencing a lot of burning to your skin. Your skin reacts as though it was burned, because that's what the lasers, that's a side effect of the lasers. And so you kind of, you have to take care of it very specifically. And then after you do that, you have this adhesive, from 3 days of having a fully dressed wound that, may have been blistered and may have been, bloody, all different kinds of things. It's not a pretty process. Now you got to figure out how to get all that freaking adhesive from the tape over the course of 3 days off of your body. I've had to figure all of these things out, and I can tell someone how to do all of these things. So this actually could be a very good niche. Lots to write about. Like I said, a lot to write about, and it's a good way to go into a niche that, doesn't really have a whole lot of competition. It would be really, really easy to add a lot of value. The other thing is it's a high barrier to entry. My personal tattoo removal sessions, and these aren't even as expensive as it gets, are about $300 a pop. So a lot of people aren't going to have it done, but a lot of people are going to be considering having it done. And I think it's the combination when I talk about high barrier to entry. How many people are going to have it done that also get into internet business and consider pursuing that as a niche? That's where you really carve down the odds of someone, how many people are going to be in that niche. It's just not going to be a super high competition niche. It's a very motivated niche. If you want to have a tattoo removed, you're probably, it could be somewhat personal, which taps into something we talked about in one of the previous lessons. But it's also a very difficult problem that a lot of people that want to have a tattoo removed face. And so again, that makes for a very motivated buying audience. So ultimately, the most difficult challenge with this niche is not going to be how to add value. It's not going to be how to overcome the competition. It's not going to be not having enough to write about. The challenge for this particular niche is going to be how to monetize. But again, if you're dealing with a buying audience, you will always have options for monetization. Okay, so that's it's easy to fall in the trap of saying any niche can be monetized. Technically speaking, that's true, but realistically, you can monetize a recipe site. You just need so much traffic that to make a full-time living from it's really difficult. So I'm trying to help you avoid that, of course. But if you did get the traffic, there would be a lot of different options. Just the ones that came to me off the top of my head would be an ebook, again, somewhere between $10 and $20, maybe a little bit less than $10, where you address all of those problems up front. Again, it was a long journey to find out everything I needed to find out for tattoo removal, and I go to a really good clinic that gave me a lot of information up front, but that still didn't help me fully with pain recovery options. That still didn't help me with how to get the freaking adhesive off of my body after I've had a fully dressed wound for 3 days. Because there's just so much medical tape involved that there's all this leftover adhesive, and it's really, really difficult. I had to look that up. So putting all of that information in one place and selling it as an ebook could be an excellent way to monetize. And ultimately, I think if enough traction, if you got enough traffic, that you got enough traction in the niche, the best way to monetize this would be to sell leads to tattoo removal clinics, which is, again, kind of a difficult thing to think about, but it's also something that's very doable. You would have to call and email clinics around, the United States and potentially around the world. But if you could find one in every major city, and then you could have a programmer write a script on your website based on someone's location, this is not a difficult thing to do. It wouldn't cost a whole lot of money to have done. That changes which clinic they're referred to, and then you had a phone number that tracked, okay, I sent them this lead, which is how lead tracking is done. Again, something that I'd like to talk more about in future training, but there's actually a lot of information about this. There's a whole sect of internet marketing, a whole industry or a subculture in internet marketing that is how to sell leads. And there's a lot of really good information there. So again, at the end of the day, if it's the difference between your site making $1,000 and your site making $15,000 a month, are you going to figure out how to crack it? Heck yeah, because a lot of those leads could be worth $5, $10, $20 each, because the clinic that I go to is making several $1,000s or several $100 at least off of every patient. I just so happen to have a very large tattoo where they're probably going to profit somewhere between $1,500, $2,000, maybe more dollars by the time my tattoo is completely removed, probably closer to $3,000, I would assume. So, so that's a really high value lead. So that's probably the best, that's probably like the ultimate vision. It's going to take a long time to get there. There's a lot of traffic involved, and then there's a lot of technical skill and implementation involved. But again, at the end of the day, it's very possible. You're dealing with a buying audience, a very motivated audience. It's possible to make a lot of money off of that audience in the long run. You just have to get creative. There are always options. You just have to get creative. So again, that comes back to working in a buying niche. All right, so we've gone through enough examples, I think. I think that gives you enough, kind of angles to think about and kind of make all of this concrete so that you can evaluate your own niches really accurately. The key takeaways, though, I always want to kind of boil it down to the simplest form so that it's as easy to walk away with and deal with those feelings of being overwhelmed. A buying audience isn't enough, as we discussed, right? We've kind of covered that over this training. You may have heard, initially you heard, okay, buying audience, okay. You may have thought, if I do this, I've got it right. And there are a lot of exceptions to that. You still need to be careful not to go too narrow or too broad, and you still need large enough commissions for it to make sense. Because again, are you likely to get hundreds of thousands or millions of visitors a month? Not remotely as likely as you are to get 1,000 visitors a day or 2,000 or even 500 visitors a day. So those are the economics we talked about in a previous lesson. We want to keep those skewed in our favor and working for us rather than working against us. So a buying audience is not enough. You want to make sure that you can write a lot of content surrounding the topic if you can't afford to buy all of the products for reviews. So again, don't fall into that trap where it's just, I'm going to write, drone reviews, and then you find out, oh crap, I can't add value in this niche because I can't get my hands on the products. Then you need to find a different way to write content surrounding that industry and surrounding that niche and those purchase decisions, and write about those and produce really high quality content and add value there instead. Okay, if you line up all of the above on this slide with a buying audience, there will be a way to monetize. So if you narrow it down to a niche that isn't too large or too narrow, and you can figure out how to add value in that niche, and it's a buying audience that makes purchases, that is likely to make a purchase to solve their pain point or answer their question, there will be a way to monetize it. And I talked about some really unique ones in this video, from selling leads to tattoo removal clinics around the United States to manufacturing your own phone cases. It's going to be possible. You don't need to concern yourself with exactly how you're going to do it right now. There's so much in between here and there that's important, but no, if these factors line up, there is going to be a way to make a very good amount of money from that niche site. You just may have to get a little bit creative, okay? And you may have to create it yourself. So that's it for good niche, bad niche. Hopefully it helped more than it hurt. You know, again, made a lot of these complex concepts that we've discussed much more concrete and easier to understand. And hopefully it equipped you with kind of a Swiss Army knife tool set to evaluate your own niche ideas by. But as always, if you have questions, if you're still going, man, I don't know if this is a good niche, post it in the Facebook group. Let's take a look at it. Let's kind of dissect it and talk about it as a community. I know that can be intimidating because you might feel like someone's, you know, going to compete with you, but at the same time, if it sets you up for success or helps you completely rule out a niche and saves you months in the process, is that a good risk to reward ratio? I would absolutely say so. And the odds are people aren't going to steal your niche. Unfortunately, most of us are just tied up. You know, people have treated me in the past like, I can't tell this guy my niche. I don't have time to steal anyone's niche, guys. I'm involved in enough niches myself and enough different projects and making money, you know, finding different ways to monetize my existing sites. I'm just, you know, there's just no chance that I'm going to steal anybody's niche. There are enough of them out there that nobody needs to go stealing other people's niches. And just while we're on the topic, if you see someone ballsy enough and putting enough trust in the community to share their niche, to workshop it, don't steal their niche. Don't be that person, right? Come up with your own niche. There are plenty of them out there. It can be inspiring. It can be helpful. It can be cool to think about, like, go, hey, that's a good niche. That's a good example. I need to come up with something like that for myself. But don't steal other people's niches. It's just a dick thing to do. I say all that to say, if you want to workshop, if you're not sure, if you've gone through all this and you're going, man, I still don't know if it's a good enough niche, we're going to go through one more video where we wrap up and really get down, you know, revisit a lot of these concepts and nail them down, really make them solid. But if you want to post it to the Facebook group, of course, it's free for registered users here. Registered members, feel free to post to the Facebook group and we'll all work on it together. All right, so that's that. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video, and if not, I will see you in the Facebook group between now and then. All right, so I'll see you guys there.